So I went to Orange Conference again this year, about in April, and so we had gone down to Georgia, and we had gone and worshipped with our college group, and we got to meet a lot of different other churches and whatnot, and we had gone through a bunch of different things in the session. Something I personally did not know that I learned this year that apparently other people knew that I didn't was what is orange? And they were explaining why they chose that theme to go with, and they were talking about how yellow is the light of the church, and then the red is the heart of the home, and when you mix the two, you get orange. So that was the whole purpose of calling the conference orange. And so going through all the sessions and the worship and everything, that was just wonderful, getting to make those connections with other churches and getting to hear some of those struggles that they're having with whether it be volunteers or getting people into their church or, doing different curriculums. Orange has a lot of different varieties for different churches, whether it's, you're struggling to get youth into the church or it's college age or you just need a different curriculum. Orange offers all those items. And so I have a video that one of our friends at college had put together of just our group in the central group. So I'll have him play that one. So that right there is my Professor Harper. He's the one that would take us to Orange. He was kind of the one that was in charge of all of that. And so, that was kind of some of the main sessions, some of the workshops that you got to see, a lot of different people singing up on stage. They've got some professional dancers and stuff there. I was trying to think what I was going to say. I saw it in the video. Oh, so our class, when we would go with Central, they have a special type of agreement with Orange that they'll have some of the speakers come and talk to us personally, so we get to go to a different room, and some of the speakers from either the workshops or the speakers that are on stage get to actually have a one-on-one with the students. So they get to talk to us because, it furthers our education, and we get to learn and talk about that when we go back to college. And they just have so much more information, and then when you're in the one-on-one talks with them, you just get to ask all these questions you can't ask in 100, crowd room with, a bunch of other people trying to learn about this workshop. So that was always really nice about going with Central, is you would be able to see these speakers and you get to ask these questions that you had where it's where did you come up with that information or that research? Or, what do I do in this volunteer position with this very specific issue? They were able to tailor to our personal needs, and that was really neat. So we got to see 2 or 3 of those speakers, and we did the same thing last year. And I don't think I mentioned that last year, and I wanted to talk about that again because, I mean, it was just neat getting to see those people and have that one-on-one interaction, because you don't get that when you're, you know, in a big room of people and there's so many people that have this like very different questions. You just can't get there in that time frame of 45 minutes to an hour. There's just too many questions. So that was just neat going with Central, you know, because they don't offer that to other people. That's just with like the Central Christian College group. And so I just thought that was really neat. But I do have a lot of information that I got from the workshops. So they have so many different workshops, just so countless many, and they fill up so fast. And so I picked 3 that I really wanted to learn about, and the first one I went to was about middle school. So if you would go to that first slide, I think, after the video. That one, thank you. So here for a new kind of middle schooler, what's changed and hasn't changed about the middle school phase. That's what the session was called. And this lady was so smart. She had so much to say, and I would sit in her like that lecture for hours. I would do that all again. She was just such a smart cookie. And it boggled my mind. Just the things even I don't know. I'm 20. I'm very much a Gen Z person, and I am just amazed at how little I know about Gen Alpha, and that's just one generation away. So I mean, I can't imagine how different and vast it is for, you know, generations before me even. Like, it just was so crazy. And she had talked about how this is probably, I think this is the first year Gen Alpha is going into middle school. I was just like really boggled by all this information. So the first thing I want to talk about is middle schoolers are self-conscious and we forgot how to relate. So one of the first things she's had us do when we worked into this workshop was she had us all get up and go to one side of the room, and she didn't tell us anything. She said, you know, we're going to do this activity. I'll explain it when we're done. So she had us all go to one side of the room, and the directions were when you get tapped, go to the other side of the room. So it started off with she'd tap a few people, and it was just a small group of people that would go. It was like she'd wait a little bit, and you're just like looking at these people like, what is going on? And, you know, then it was just these bigger groups, and they were going across, and you know, it wasn't as noticeable because it's just like everyone's going. And then you have a few people that are on this side now, and everyone's on this side. And she waited on those people, and then she was slowly tapping those people to go over until there were 2 people standing. I was one of the last 2 to get tapped to go over. And, you know, she brought us up on stage because there were 4 of us. So the first 2 that went and the last 2 that went. And she had asked me, she had said, you know, how did that make you feel, you know, being one of the last people to go over there? And I said it was awkward. I was looking at these people, not understanding what's going on, and, you know, I'm watching them, and I'm just going, hi. You know, it's just weird. You have all these eyeballs on you, and it's just such a weird experience. And she, you know, she had kind of taught me, you know, then she had moved over to the other people, like the first people that went, it's like, how did it feel for you? And the same answer, it was awkward, you know. Why was I touched first to go over? Like, I don't understand what you're doing. And she had then told us, she said, this is how your middle schoolers feel going through puberty. She says, you've got the first few groups going through, and they don't understand why, you know, they're going first. It's an awkward stage for them. They don't, you know, they don't understand, like, why me? Why am I going first? I'm so, you know, I don't relate to these other kids anymore. I went through this first, and then these last kids are wondering, why is it not happening to me? Why am I the last one? Why am I the odd duck out? Everyone's looking at me like I'm the weird one. And she had said, we are so far removed because we haven't been in that stage of our lives for so long. And she said, this is a great exercise to do with your volunteers to get them in that mindset again, because those middle schoolers, you know, need someone to relate to. And we've forgotten how to relate to that stage because we haven't been in that stage for so long. And so I thought that was just so neat. And so after, you know, that, we sat down and she just started spitting all of this information at us. And so the first thing she kind of talked about was technology and AI. Are they addicts or are they experts? And this was really neat. She spent so much time on this topic. And so I'm just going to, shoot a bunch of these this knowledge and facts at you because she just had so much of it. So 53% of students have a smartphone by age 11, and AI has become a big part of their lives. This is something that might actually boggle your mind. There are people now coaching on having an AI boyfriend or girlfriend. We're starting to see kids actually have interactions with AI and saying, this is my boyfriend, this is my girlfriend. And that is a conversation we've never had to deal with before. We've never been that far in technology. And so I was just, when I heard this stuff, I was like, how do you even, breach that conversation? We were just getting into a conversation about, catfishing and, don't talk to strangers online and, the dangers of that. And now we're having to coach on this whole new topic of, an AI boyfriend or girlfriend, and how do you even interact with that? I just can't even imagine or fathom what a middle schooler might see in an AI that they want to date in AI. I just don't get it. And she had talked about how this is actually something that's happening. She has seen actual classes of people coaching on how to navigate the situation where middle schoolers are dating an AI. And then something else she had said that was really interesting. She said at 2 years old, they can be an expert on a smartphone. They can, learn how to, use a smartphone by 2 years old. That's crazy. That is insane. I just think that is so interesting, and I just cannot wrap my mind around that, because 2 years old, you're still learning so much, and I mean, to be an expert, like she said, expert on a smartphone, that's crazy to me. And one of the problems she had said that, Gen Alpha has learned from being in such a technological era was Gen Alpha learns by doing, but they're also learning that actions are reversible on a screen. So one click and they can just go back, click and I go back, and there's no actions, there's no consequence to those actions. And the mindset that these kids have is no matter what I'm doing, I can reverse it. And that is the mindset they have when it comes to technology. No matter what I do, I can reverse it. There is no consequence to it. And so she had said, keep that in mind when talking to your middle schoolers, because they don't understand, the consequences that come with some actions, because like she said, they have learned that things are reversible. Just one click and it's gone. And so, there's just so many issues that she was talking about, that they have learned with technology, and just the testing groups. We don't have all the information about Gen Alpha yet, because like she said, they're just reaching middle school. So we don't know some of the cons of this generation, some of the pros of this generation. We're still learning about them. And something else she had said was 65% of Gen Alpha will work in jobs that do not exist today. 65%. And they need the skills of technology to set them up for success. So the things that they're learning on their phones right now, they need those skills, because 65% of jobs are not even created yet, and they're going to be technology oriented. And so they are developing those skills right now with the technology that we have now. And then she had talked about this, and this is something where I think it's hard to receive, and it has a lot of people have different mixed opinions on this. But she said, whether you like it or not, everything is decentralizing. We can either be the generation that fears change, or we can coach it. Because she had so much to say about that idea, because I mean, for so many years, there's been so many generations talking about how technology is going too far, which in a way I do agree, it is going too far. But she was talking about, instead of fearing that change, we need to be ahead of it and coach it, put our kids in the right mindsets, in the right headspace to receive that information and process that information. And that was so neat. And let me see here. So then she had gone on to talk about like the personalized learning. So it's not about what you say, but the conversation that follows. The kids are not necessarily worried about this lesson that you have to say. They're worried about how does this tailor to their situation. So instead of, all that time and energy we spend in a conversation that, of this big lesson, Gen Alpha is more concerned about the conversation afterwards because it's personalized. It's tailored to their situation, and we as leaders need to help them connect the dots from the lesson we learn because they're asking, what does it mean in my life? And sometimes they can't draw that line. Sometimes we have to connect those dots for them, draw that line for them, tailor that to them so they can understand it better because it's just not going to click all the time. And she had asked us, she said, have you ever wondered why middle schoolers are so interested in watching other people make slime in a video or play video games? All these videos that these kids are doing online. We were just talking to Alex, and he was talking about Eldon and how he just didn't understand, why his son was so interested in these videos and, watching someone else do it. He couldn't understand it. And she had said, this is a fundamental mechanism of social learning. It's imitation and mimicking, but we just used to do it in person, but now they're doing it through a screen. So all those videos they're watching, they're learning, they're mimicking, they're intimidating, they're doing those things, but they're just doing it through a screen now. And Gen Alpha, this was interesting. She had said she doesn't know if graduation will be a thing in the future, especially with Gen Alpha, because she said Gen Alpha views education as something very different than we have. So they don't view it as I've finished I have crossed the finish line. That's not how they view things anymore like we used to. It's I have to keep learning to be successful. So there's never an end. It's just they keep going and they keep going and they keep going, and that was just, there's so much information from this class. And one of the other things she had talked about is we do our best to protect our kids from hearing explicit music or wording in our households, but just the generation we're in now, that's getting so much harder to protect our kids from that. And she said this generation's just going to hear it. There's so much technology. Like, you can protect your kids in the household, but when they go out, it's everywhere. It is everywhere. And she says, we are past the age of protecting middle schoolers from information. That age is over because the information is in their back pocket. They have their phones. It's at their fingertips. The information you have been trying to, protect your kid from, it's in their back pocket. It's in their friend's back pocket. It's on a computer. It's on the TV. It's everywhere. With technology just being everywhere now. How are you supposed to protect your kids from the things that you were once trying to protect them from? What was easy, maybe a little easier to do 10 years ago, 20 years ago, protecting them from information is become almost impossible now. And so her whole spiel on why she was sharing this was, she says, we need to be ahead of that. We need to coach that. Instead of, being scared of the things our kids are going to learn, we need to be ahead of that and coach that and, let them, teach them how to think about that and how to internalize that and, how they're going to handle and cope and deal with that information. Instead of making them fear the things that they're going to learn, you just need to get ahead of that and coach them on that. And I thought that was really, really interesting because, that's just such a different mindset than I've heard from so many people. And then the last thing that she kind of touched on for the last bit of her workshop was mental health. So I had just gone through the personalized learning, so the last point was the mental health. And so these were some facts that she just kind of spitballed at us. And so the age at which we are exposed to a traumatic event determines the depth of its manifestation in our soul. More than 2/3 of children reported at least one traumatic event by the age of 16. 1 in 12 U.S. children and teens will experience the death of a parent or a sibling by the age of 18. By the end of high school, 20% of today's students will have experienced the death of someone close to them. So far, This year, the U.S. has seen an average of 2 mass shootings every day. This generation will have a shared trauma over the COVID pandemic when they were in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, which were formative years. So 3rd and 4th and 5th grade were their formative years, and COVID kind of took that from them. And so research and studies will say that as they get older, you'll start to see some more of that, how that affected them and how that trauma affected them, and the shared trauma that those groups will have over COVID. So I thought that was really unique. And I mean, she had so much to say in that workshop, so much. I mean, that doesn't even, that barely touches the tip of the iceberg of just all the things that she had to say. She was very knowledgeable about middle school, such a difficult age, and so many volunteers are very turned off by that age because they don't understand it, they don't relate, they don't want to touch it, wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Like, that is just kind of how some volunteers about middle school. Because, I mean, it is such a weird age, and it is such a drastic transition from being a little kid into adulthood. And volunteers just don't know how to deal with that. And she just knew so much about that age, and she was very on the ball with it. And I just loved her workshop because she was just such a knowledgeable young woman, and she had been doing it for years and years and years. And she is constantly learning new things and reading books and touching up on it and trying to talk with other volunteers on how to reach middle school as it keeps getting different and different. So I just, all of these workshops I went to, the things I say and the things I'm going to touch on is just hardly anything. And so the next slide is 18 plus. So moving the finish line, how to be here for the 18 plus. And so over 1 million young people drift from faith every year. 18 and 30 is a decade of intense heightened transitions, and there are 7 key transitions that they will go through. So the 7 key transitions are identity, vocation, wellness, spiritual, religious transitions, responsibility, geographical and institutional and relational transitions. And they had kind of talked about just, they went in more depth of what those meant and the transitions that 18 plus and up to 30 are going to experience, and just how intense those transitions are. And so this one's a little bit harder to talk about because it was a Q&A style class. And so they kind of left it open for all of these different churches in their very, different circumstances and situations to ask questions, and they would answer it the best that they could with their experiences. But something that this class had kind of touched on was there is a lack of youth for sorry, let me rephrase this. We have classes for our youth and our adult ages, but there is such a big lack of classes for 18 and college age, that young adult age. There's just nothing for them because the youth age, they don't relate, they're past that, and then the adult class, they're not even there yet, they don't quite understand, they don't have those, for an older age group, they haven't gone through those experiences yet. And so there needs to be a class in the middle, but not a lot of churches are offering that right now. And so this class was just kind of talking about, how do we bridge that gap? How do we involve those students? How do we get those people into the church? And it was just really different and neat. So in this class, they kind of, like I said, they left the workshop open for questions and different struggles in churches, from getting college age into the church, keeping them coming back, to creating a class for 18 and plus that they can actually enjoy and learn from. And so there's I heard probably about 10 different churches with 10 very different problems, and this is why I really think more people should be going to conferences like this, because you learn so much. And I just wish I could, talk about all of the stuff I learned, but there's just so much. There's so much that I learned. I don't even know where to start with half that information. But with the key transitions, she had asked, which of these do you see your young adults working through the most in a context? do you see your adults having, identity, transitions? Like, are they struggling finding out who they are and, what their purpose is in life? Or are you seeing, more people struggle with like spiritual, religious, transitions? Like, I don't really know where I'm going within my faith, or I don't really understand these questions about God, or, or is there a relational like transition where it's their relationships are transitioning from a college, from a teenage stage to a college age, and those relationships are becoming different, and the needs in those relationships are becoming different. So I mean, there's just so much that she had. Well, there were 3 speakers for this class, and they just were going through so much information. But I mean, they had talked about, from like how to get these college ages and a goal, and making sure you communicate that goal, and making sure like there is a curriculum and there's a reason, there's a rhyme, like, and there's just so much about that. Sorry. And then the last workshop, workshop 3, which was Here for an Anxious Generation, helping teenagers move past the spiral of anxiety and despair. And so 72% increase in ADHD among students since 2010, and then 134% increase in anxiety increase in ADHD, and then 134% increase in anxiety among students since 2010. And then she had talked about how anxiety is future-oriented and depression is past-oriented. And so anxiety is constantly worrying about what the future is going to hold. Am I going to keep this job? Am I, going to have enough money to make ends meet next month? Am I, am I doing the right things? Am I, going in the right direction? So there's just been this crazy spike in anxiety, and a crazy spike in depression and ADHD, and one of the things that she had kind of related that to was social media and the technology of things, and just the aftermath of that. And so this was really sad and interesting. She had said, the self-harm percentage in a group of 10 and 14-year-olds, for boys it has increased 48% since 2010. And then for girls, it's increased 188% since 2010. And that's the self-harm rates. And so a quote that they had used in the class was, "The mental health problem is medical, but the solutions are not just medical. The solutions are social, environmental, and political. We not only need better access to medical treatments, but we need to include people, place, and purpose." And they had gone through, there's just still a relational and spiritual gap in mental illness. And we have the power to go back into our communities and make a difference. Reaching those people and just talking to them and just doing the Christian thing and doing what Jesus would do, and just getting into those really messy situations and talking them through it. And I think in a world where people are so connected on a phone but disconnected in person, they're lacking, that interaction with people of, how do I, someone who can help them navigate depression and anxiety and dealing with their ADHD. There's just not enough people getting out there and doing that. And there's just such a big divide there, because people are so connected in technology, but they're lacking this in-person connection that your soul deeply longs for. And you see it, you really do. You see it in this new generation and how they're interacting with other people and the skills that they've lost. And it's just crazy that there is such a big spike in these things, and it's just continuing to get bigger. That's just crazy. And so something she had talked about, they had really focused on anxiety for this class, because I mean, we're seeing a lot more of that, and the physical signs of anxiety. She had like had a class at one point, and she'd ask them, when you get anxious, what physical signs do you see? It's like having a hard time breathing. I feel my, heart rate go up, and I just can't focus very well. Like all these physical signs, and you just see more of those physical signs as time goes on in these younger kids. And they had gone through like breathing exercises. They're like, when you have a kid that's really anxious or someone in your life that's really anxious, walk them through an exercise or two. So the first exercise they went through is like anxiety comes in big waves. So, you just inhale the anxiety and you exhale it. And then you ask them, do you feel better? And they, even if it is just a tiny percent, like 1% better, it's still better. And they were just trying to advocate, like, just get into the mindset of just trying to help these kids, like, do these different techniques, different methods, just meet them where they're at. And this was interesting. I had never thought about this, but they had talked about a coping mechanism for really negative thoughts, which I had thought was really interesting because we had talked about that kind of last year in a different class, but it was for like a marriage class, and how like negative thoughts can impact your marriage and your relationships and different things. And it was just neat to kind of see, last year from a very different workshop kind of go hand in hand with a different workshop of this year. And the coping mechanism for, negative thoughts is this thought true? Is this thought helpful? Is this thought inspiring? Is this thought necessary? And is this thought kind? And if you go through those steps and your student or whoever it is, whether it's a parent, a kid, a student, or someone who's, an elder, whoever it is, you go through these questions. Is this thought true? No. Is this thought helpful? No. Is this thought inspiring? No. Is this thought necessary? No. And is this thought kind? No. And so you go through that, and then you ask the next question. Well, how did this thought make you feel? And they'll tell you these negative feelings that they're feeling with this thought. And, then you'll ask, well, how did this thought make you act? How did this thought, create an outcome for you? And then the last question you lead with is, what would happen if you didn't have this thought? And it really, they were really hammering in this idea of, like, this whole workshop was oriented around not only just like mental stuff, but like physical things that are going on in your brain, the chemicals, the hormones, the things that are going on. Like asking that one last question, what would happen if you don't have this thought? It completely wires the brain differently. Like physically it wires it very differently. And it causes your brain to think with the other half of the brain. And it positively reinforces a different thought. So when you think the opposite thought, it reroutes the brain to think of positive reinforcement. And then the last thing that they kind of touched about in that in the workshop was they're talking about their volunteers and their ministers and stuff. And we talk about a young generation of anxiety, depression, ADHD and stuff, but the thing that we don't talk about is like our ministers. And a lot of our ministers don't have a self-care plan. And so they were talking about, making sure you are checking up on your ministers and the people that are volunteering and just asking how they're doing, being there for them, asking what you can do, because, they also struggle with those things as well. And when you're dealing with a generation that is really stuck in, the dumps, I mean, that wears off onto you, and you need to have someone there to help you through that too. And so we need to prioritize our own mental health so we can help the next generation with their mental health. And so, these are all the things I learned in the workshops, and that's all I have for you. But, there's just so much. I probably could think of so many more things, and I could go on for hours about it, but, there's just way too much information to pack into one presentation alone. And that's only 3 workshops out of, I think probably close to 80 workshops they had there. So there's just so stinking many. And that's just crazy. Out of 3 workshops, I've given you all of this information about a younger generation. Like, can you imagine what you might have learned in a whole different workshop? Like, these were the workshops that piqued my interest. I mean, for someone else, it might have been something different, but I mean, that's all I've got for you, so thank you.